Like I said, I'm a second year medical student, and I just finished up my first year back in May. And currently, I'll talk about this a few slides later. But I'm doing a research project, and my mentor actually worked with the medical school admissions with Cornell University, and he also does work with the medical school admissions at the University of Louisville. And through him, I've actually gotten to interview just last week a couple of people that work for the admissions, like the director of admissions. And I just essentially asked them like what it takes for a pre-med student to get into medical school. And that's the information that I want to share with you today. Kind of like a fun fact, I've been published in Yahoo Finance and AP News. And then what I want to talk about is Medic Tribe. So essentially, this is a little service that has started 6 months ago, where essentially I tutor students on like the MCAT with their essays, the whole application, practice interviews. And this is kind of like my passion that I realize is like education. And hopefully one day as a doctor, I'll get the chance to work with educating medical students. So I'm pretty passionate about like spreading information to pre-meds and kind of helping them out with the process, just like how I was helped when I was a pre-med. And in terms of what I want to do in the future, I'm pretty interested in interventional cardiology or anesthesiology. I was all about surgery in the beginning, but after shadowing and talking to a few surgeons, I think it's not for me. But this is just a funny meme that I found about, I think, how everyone feels as a pre-med. So we're all trying to like volunteer, get a high MCAT, get a high GPA, the leadership positions and essays, and do well in all the classes, and then somehow also make time for eating, sleeping, and exercise. And it can become pretty overwhelming, especially the junior and senior year. And so this is just a funny meme that I found about reasons to not go into medical school. So the meme is just playing off a common joke and stereotype that I think especially within the Asian community, there's a lot of pressure from parents to force their kids to go into medical school. And speaking from my experience as a medical school student, I think medical school is way too hard to be living someone else's dream. It's something that you really have to do wholeheartedly, or else I don't think you'll succeed in medical school or even as a doctor because of the amount of time, commitment, and sacrifice that it takes. Another reason to not go into medical school is for the money aspect. I think a lot of people will look at doctors and assume that, you know, they have like a lot of money and big houses and whatnot, but realistic, if you take a look at it financially, at least in Kentucky, where I'm from, tuition is $40,000 a year for in-state applicants, and it's $60,000 per year for out-of-state applicants. So if you do the math, that's 40 times 4, which is 160 for the entire 4 years, and then plus the interest, it ends up being 200,000. So by the time that you get out of medical school, you're already in $200,000 in debt, and you don't actually start earning that six-figure salary after residency and then after your fellowship. So that's another 6 or 7 years. So it's all about delayed gratification, and that big salary will not come for a while. And then another thing is that a lot of people want to go into medical school for just like the, you know, honor aspect that you make, you know, it's a respectful field. But honestly, there's so many other fields like engineering, business, pretty much any other professional career which has just as much honor and respect. And then the biggest red flag that I have been told in interviews, which will really, really mark you down, is if you use the line or say anything derivative of "I want to help people," because there are so many other careers where you can help people, and medicine is probably the most difficult one to go to if your focus is on service. Okay. So with freshman year, I actually think that this is the hardest, probably one of the toughest semesters of college is your first semester of freshman year. The reason why I say that is because for a lot of people, this is the first time in their lives when they've had independence, you know, like away from family and away from your parents, no one to really hold you accountable. And for a lot of people that can go against them. So what I recommend for freshman year is literally just focusing on adjusting and getting a routine. And I wouldn't pressure yourself on the MCAT and your application too much for freshman year. I would honestly just have a good friend group, someone you can study with, and focus on time management. You can see my last bullet, I wrote time management 3 times, and that's because what they teach you at medical school, what they drilled into us the first week, we have an orientation week, is that time management is the number one skill that will make you successful in medical school and as a physician. You really start to learn how important time management is in medical school when you have, 6 to 7 hours of studying every day. So I would focus on mastering those time management skills early on so that habit carries on with you for the rest of your life. In terms of the general classes, pretty much these are just the general science classes that I think everyone takes. The 1 and 2 that I wrote down, my university divides the biology and chemistry into like general chemistry 1 and then general chemistry 2. And we have biology 1 and biology 2. I think some schools may have their own system, but just basically doing your general biology and chemistry classes along with the labs. And then the physics, we have a 1 and 2, which is like algebra-based physics, and then electricity and magnetism is 2. So making sure you get those classes done and doing the labs. So I think that's the majority of the year class that you're going to be taking freshman year as a pre-med. So the next slide is what I actually wish that I did as a freshman. I didn't actually do these things ahead. I made a bunch of mistakes. So I kind of got by with not having an agenda and not really managing my time. I stayed on top of my work, but I was pretty ineffective. So I had a lot of late nights in the library that could have been prevented had I just used my time more efficiently throughout the day. Another thing is that I wish I kind of began shadowing early. And I'll talk about the importance of shadowing over a long period of time later on. But it's important to start building relationships with physicians early on. Next is checking to see if my major actually included all the pre-med classes. So I actually started off freshman year as a chemical engineer with a pre-med route. And then after I met with my advisor, I figured out that if I wanted to be a pre-med as a chemical engineer, I would actually have to do an additional 5th year to fit in the prerequisites. And my scholarship did not cover 5 years, it covered 4 years. So therefore, I had to switch my major into bioengineering, which kind of encompassed the pre-medical classes better. So if you have like an untraditional major, something that's not your like biology or chemistry major, I would definitely 100% check to see with your advisor to make sure that you can still graduate within 4 years and fit in all the prerequisites for medical school. And then another big problem that I see a lot of people have with freshman years, they get involved in all these organizations because, we all want to be involved and make an impact in the community. So I think I was literally involved in like 5 or 6. So I was running around every day from meeting to meeting. And I quickly realized that I spent so much time with my extracurriculars that I didn't have enough time for actually like studying for classes. And your classes are honestly more important than the organizations, at least as a pre-med. And so I would actually just focus on being passionate about 2 or 3 organizations and focusing your efforts on building those up and getting positions on those, like leadership positions. And that could be a really powerful, and continue those organizations until you're a senior, because continuity and dedication is what medical schools are really looking for. Talking with the admissions people at my school, they honestly want quality over quantity. They don't really like it when they see applicants with like 50 different organizations, and then they see that the time span for each organization is like 6 months or 1 month. To them, it means more if you have maybe 5 organizations or 4 organizations, but if you have them continued on for like 2 or 3 years, so that shows dedication and continuity, like I said. So transitioning to sophomore and junior year, I think these are probably the hardest years of college as a pre-med. These are when you're taking your higher level science classes, like where you have organic chemistry 1 and 2, you have labs, you have microbiology. So you're building upon the basic sciences you learned your freshman year. I have a separate bullet you can see here for literally biochemistry and anatomy and physiology. So I'll talk about this later on, but I actually was not able to take biochemistry and metabolism before I took the MCAT. I had to take it after I took the MCAT, which is not a good idea because the MCAT, I tutor people with the MCAT currently, and the MCAT is roughly 10 to 15% biochemistry and metabolism. And so, in most schools, this is a graduate level course. And so it's extremely, extremely difficult to self-teach yourself this whole class. That's what I had to do, is I had to self-teach myself biochemistry. And although it worked out in favor for me for the MCAT, it's not something that works for a lot of people because it takes a lot of outside effort. So it makes much more sense if you can have an actual professor with an actual course, with actual lectures to walk you through biochemistry and metabolism, because that'll help you immensely for the biochem portion of the MCAT. Anatomy and physiology I don't think it's a requirement for most schools, actually, which is really ironic, but I think it's highly recommended that if you have the opportunity to take anatomy and physiology, that you take it, because you literally use all this information the first semester of medical school. And so this is where I talk about the shadowing. So my sophomore and junior year, I started shadowing 2 doctors consistently. And when I say consistently, I just mean once a month for a few hours. Although it might not seem like a lot, I continued this shadowing from sophomore to senior year. So if you look at it in terms of a longer time span, the continuity that I had with these 2 doctors paid off because I built a relationship with them for 2 years. And so that helps tremendously when it comes to letters of recommendation. So specifically my sophomore and junior year, for my medical school application, I had letters of recommendation from the head of thoracic surgery at the hospital, and then the head of the emergency department of the hospital. So once again, the ways that I was able to do that was freshman year. I think it was freshman or sophomore year. I just Googled the surgeons who worked in thoracic surgery. That was just something I was interested in as a sophomore, was heart surgery. So I just Googled the people who worked in the hospital. I went through the physicians and I found the head of the department. And so I emailed him and I called him and I was like, hey, I'm just a person who's interested in shadowing. Can I come shadow you like once a month? And it was just like a simple email. And he replied saying, yeah. I went in and shadowed. And after my first time that I shadowed him, I automatically scheduled the next time. And he told me to come back next month. And he gave me like a date and a time. And I just continued that for 2 years. And so all it took was a simple email and continuity for 2 years. And that's why I got a letter of recommendation from the head of thoracic surgery. Now, I used that same technique for the ER. I just kind of looked up the people who worked there, looked up their positions, and I kind of just found the one who just had the most influence. And I, called him and just scheduled a day where I could come in and shadow and use that same technique. I just scheduled every time that I was done with my shadowing, I scheduled the next time that I wanted to come in, and just did that for 2 years. And I built a relationship with them and showed my interest, and that's how I got a letters of recommendation from both of them. And this played in my favor because although I didn't know it at that time, both of them worked with the medical school that I applied to. So that was just a win-win situation where I kind of just got lucky there. And I wanted to kind of expand upon this. So my biggest failure, I think, in my sophomore junior year was I did not take the biochemistry before taking the MCAT. Thinking back, I had a lot of trouble understanding like simple things like glycolysis, the citric acid cycle. I had never been exposed to those sort of things before I studied for the MCAT. I legitimately had no idea what even glucose was because they didn't really teach that in like the general biology classes. So I had to self-teach myself all those pathways that you all probably know better than me now. And had to memorize all those steps. And my problem was that I was just memorizing steps without any sort of knowledge or context. So my understanding was so limited because I didn't really have any formal education. And so this really hindered me from performing to what I think it could have been my maximum potential on the MCAT. Now, for the people who are watching this who want to get into medical school without taking any gap years, who want to go straight into medical school, that means that you need to take your MCAT your summer of your junior year. So if you're a junior right now, that means that you should be taking the MCAT soon or you've already taken it. And you should be applying throughout this year. And the reason why is because you'll get accepted your senior year and then you'll start right after that. And so at least the way that it works in my school is that the people who do your MCAT semester, people are usually only taking 12 to 13 credit hours. And they pretty much minimize the amount of credit hours they take in that semester, so they have the maximum amount of time to study for the MCAT. Once again, I made some scheduling mistakes. I didn't look far ahead enough, and I was forced to take 18 my MCAT semester. So you can imagine that I did not have a lot of time to study outside of my classes for the MCAT, probably maximum 1 or 2 hours a day, which is really not enough. And I want to kind of emphasize, we're kind of transitioning topics here. So I want to talk about the research that I did. And so the specific research that I did was under the Department of Neurosurgery. And specifically under Department of Neurosurgery, I focus on spinal cord injury research. So kind of emphasizing the importance of research, because I know your all's organization is about research. So I also made some mistakes with how I did my research. So first of all, in terms of research, I think it's not something that's required, but it's something that will set you apart. The reason why is because you all can probably relate to this, is that when you're a freshman or sophomore in college, a lot of y'all will still include stuff from your high school transcript because it'll still be kind of recent and relevant. But as you become a junior and senior, your high school stuff isn't that relevant anymore. The cool thing about research is that once you get a publication, that is relevant and that will be on your resume for the rest of your life. It doesn't matter what career you go into, it doesn't matter what you do. The fact that you can say that you have an actual publication in an accredited scientific journal is a huge, huge win. And this is even bigger when it comes to medical school, and I'll talk about that in a second. But if you are still trying to look into getting into research, say if you're a freshman or sophomore or even junior, you want to start getting into research, the one mistake that I did was that I didn't ask for the rate of publications that are produced by the specific people that I was interested in working for. This is important because unfortunately in the field of research that I went into, the experiments lasted like a year because we worked with cats. Whereas if you do experiments with mice, the experiments are very short and they're like a few weeks to like a maximum like a month. So with the animal that we were working with cats. So our experiments were up to a year and a half. And I did a total of 2 years worth of research during my undergrad for the Spinal Cord Injury Research Institution. So honestly, majority of my time was doing experiments. I didn't even get enough time to write a paper. And I'm actually still in the process, even as a first-year medical student, communicating with my undergraduate mentor and still trying to get my name on their publication that they're still trying to do from the data that I collected 3 years ago. So I would definitely be straightforward and direct with the person that you're emailing and tell them that you're interested in going into medical school. You definitely want to be able to write 1 or 2 papers and you want to get published. And they can tell you whether that's a realistic goal or not. If I had asked that to my mentor who I did research under, she probably would have said no. But I was just kind of afraid to ask that. And so it kind of bit me in the butt and I wasn't able to get a publication out of it, even though I worked for 2 years. So rate of publications is extremely, extremely important. And like I said, don't hide the fact that you want to get into medical school. Majority of researchers that you're going to be working for know that you probably want to get into medical school and you're using your research as one of those things to boost your application. It's something that everyone does and there's no point in hiding that fact. So just be clear and be honest with them. There's no reason to lie. Okay, so now we're kind of transitioning into the junior senior year. The waiting game, so this is what I think was the most difficult part for me as a pre-med, was the mental game, which is what I call the waiting game. So essentially you take the MCAT and you submit the AMCAS, which I'll talk about in a slide, which is your whole entire pre-med application. And then you have to wait a month to get secondaries. Secondaries are applications that are specific for each school. So your AMCAS has a certain set of essays, and then each school specifically has another set of essays that you have to do, and those are called secondaries. So then you submit your secondaries for each school, and then you have to wait and check your email every day for your interviews and whether you get selected for an interview or not. And there's no deadline for when they can send you an interview. They can send you an interview up to the last day of acceptance. So you just have to wait and be patient. So once you get offered an interview, then you have to wait for your interview date. So you have to do a lot of interview prep. And then after you do your interview, then you have to wait to hear back. So that's another really tough thing, is that after your interview, everything is out of your hands and the decision rests up to the medical school committee. And once again, I think this was the hardest part of the pre-med cycle, was the waiting game, because it kind of really hurt me mentally. I wasn't really a patient person, and so I wanted like immediate results, and so having to wait for other people kind of really killed me at the end. But there's really nothing that you can do except to wait. Okay, so I wanted to give you all some hardcore statistics and numbers. This graph right here is showing you the relationship between GPA and MCAT. So logically, you can see that the higher MCAT score you have and the higher GPA you have, your acceptance rate percentage, like your probability of getting accepted, is going to go up. That's the y-axis. So not everyone is going to get a 520 on the MCAT. That's like the 99th percentile. So what I recommend is trying to aim for the 505 to 510 spot. It's like the kind of like the sweet spot for MD schools. And once again, I should clarify, these statistics are for MD schools. These are not for DO schools. DO schools are going to have completely different statistics. So what I recommend is the yellow bar. So I would try to aim for between the 500 to 510, preferably in the middle, the 504, 505, 506. And that puts you in. And then even with the below average GPA, which I say is like around a 3.4 to 3.6, you will get about a 40 to 50% chance of getting into medical school. And the average medical school acceptance rates per individual medical school is 7%. And the specific medical school that I go to, the University of Louisville, the statistics that they released to us in our white coat ceremony was that 2,500 people applied, and out of the 2,500 people, 160 were offered spots. So if you do the math of 160 divided by 2,500, I think that averages out to be 6.7 or 6.8%. So just right around the 7% range. So an interesting trend that I noticed was that the average MCAT for accepted students for medical schools is actually increasing. It was a 511. It is a 511, which the previous year it was a 510. So showing an upward trend in accepted scores. But once again, I want to clarify, don't let this number scare you. I was below a 511 and I got in. This is an average. So by mathematical definition, for something to be an average, there have to be things below an average. So you can definitely get accepted below that score. The overall accepted GPA was a 3.72, and the overall accepted GPA for your science GPA, which is just your pre-med classes, was a 3.65. And then a non-science GPA, if you don't include your pre-med classes and it's like your humanities and those other sorts of classes, it ends up being a 3.8 GPA. So I think to put you in a good position for medical school acceptance, what I recommend is probably like a roughly a 3.6 to a 3.7 GPA in terms of your science GPA, and roughly around the 505 to 510 MCAT. Another thing that I want to emphasize in this slide is that these statistics are highly biased in the sense that these do not take into account your personal statement, your work and activities, your letters of recommendation, and your interview. These statistics are literally only looking at the two quantitative values, which is MCAT and GPA. Med school is like there's so many other factors that go into it. Like I said, your interview, how well your essays are written, all the different organizations, who wrote your letters of recommendation, how well they were written. So just think of these as very rough approximate numbers. Your chances will obviously be much, much higher, assuming that you have good leadership organizations and good letters of recommendation. So I want to talk about the AMCAS. So the AMCAS is what's referred to as the primary application. So essentially, this is the application that every medical school that you apply to is going to get. So in terms of, to put an analogy to it, in high school, I think there was a Common App, which is what every college got. This is essentially, you can think about this, the Common App of undergrad, which is the AMCAS. This is the application that every medical school is going to get. So what the AMCAS is composed of is your personal statement, which is why do you want to become a doctor? Your work and activities. So this is every single organization that you have been involved in your freshman to senior year. Your letters of recommendation, your transcript, and then last but not least, your MCAT score. So this is what every medical school is going to see. And then based on the medical school that you send this to are going to evaluate all these 4 categories. And then if they like you, they're going to send you another application, which is called your secondary. And your secondary has essays that are individual to that school. So say you apply to 10 schools and all 10 send you secondaries, and those are 10 sets of different essays that you have to do. So it adds up really quickly. That can become a very time-consuming process. Okay, this is a pretty important slide. These are actual interview questions that I was asked in my medical school interviews. I had 3 medical school interviews, all within Kentucky. Those are the ones that I applied to. Tell me about yourself is probably the first question you'll get. This is actually a pretty hard question, believe it or not, because what they're really asking you is, why are you qualified to go into medical school? Like, why are you here? Is what tell me about yourself translates to. And the next one, this one is kind of hard. Tell me about a time you had a disagreement with someone. So I had this question asked to me. So some medical schools, the specific one that asked me this question, the interviews will actually rate you on a scale of 1 to 5 on how well you answer the question. Not all medical schools do this, but the one that I did had a numerical grading system for how well you answered your questions. 1 being really bad and 5 being the highest. So in order to get a 5 in this question, you are required to talk about a disagreement. You are required to talk about a compromise. You can't say that you overpowered someone and that you won and they were wrong. So you're required to talk about a compromise. And if you mention the fact that you had any arguments or argumentation, verbal conflict, physical disagreements, if you mention like any sort of like violent or like things that culminated into like really violent arguments, that's a deduction. So it's kind of interesting. I don't think it's ethical, but you do get graded on these open-ended questions on how well you answer them. The next one is why medicine? So the reason why this is such an important question is because a lot of people who interview you are going to be curious why you aren't going into nursing, why you aren't going into physician's assistant, why you aren't going into pharmacy, why you aren't getting into healthcare administration, why specifically a doctor. So you need to be prepared to answer, why are you choosing a doctor versus all these other healthcare professions that can help people? What is it about being a doctor that interests you? The last ethical-based questions are kind of a new form of questions that are being asked nowadays. So here's an example. A patient is asking you to calls you and says that they're having a couple of problems, like say that they're having their blood pressure's high, and they're asking you to write them a prescription. And assume that this is all over the phone call. They didn't come in your office. You haven't done any blood tests. You haven't done any tests, but you have a good relationship with the patient. You know that they're honest. So what do you do in that scenario? Do you write them a prescription or do you not write them a prescription? This is the example of an ethical-based question. And even in these ethical-based questions, there are right answers. So with the specific example that I gave, as a doctor, it would be unethical for you to write a prescription to someone based on just a phone call and their personal experience. You would have to have medical tests done. They would have to come into your office, and you would need to have quantitative values to justify writing a prescription, because you would be violating your service as a doctor. Next is a very important one, which is kind of the opposite of the disagreement, was tell me a time that you worked on a team. So I was asked this question. And once again, to answer this question and receive the full points, you have to talk about a time that you worked on a team, preferably on a project. You have to talk about your overall goal that you wanted accomplished, and you have to talk about your role on the team. So essentially, what they're looking for in this question is seeing how well you work on a team with people. Whether you're the type of person to be like the alpha that you just want to dominate everyone and become like the automatic leader, or whether you like listen to other people's opinions, you kind of take it in. Like what sort of group member are you? They're trying to find out what sort of like group team member are you, because I'm sure you all will realize that in every different group you have like different roles. You have the one person who's like the leader and who delegates. You have the other people who just kind of listen. Like there's all these like set like cliche roles that we have, and so they're trying to really figure out what type of person are you. So they want to make sure that you're a person who has good leadership skills, because as a doctor, you're pretty much like the head of the food chain. If anything goes wrong, even if a nurse makes a mistake, it's on you. You get sued. So they want to make sure that you're the type of person who can take on responsibility and that you have leadership organization. So getting back to the work and activities to justify that. Cool. Just a funny meme again about how medical school is. So kind of transitioning now to what my life in medical school is like. Medical school starts off, they kind of ease you into it, but like literally by the second day or second week, it becomes pretty high, fast paced. And in my anatomy labs, kind of like a fun fact, some medical schools will do what's called a prosection. Some will do what's called a dissection. And if you are interested in surgery, if you're interested in anatomy, this is something you need to look into. So the school that I go to does what's called a dissection. Dissection means that you, as a medical student, will get a cadaver, and you, with a team of people, you will actually dissect that cadaver, with a scalpel from day one. So the very first day of class of medical school, we went into anatomy lab, and I remember that I made the first cut on my cadaver. So this is like a real human being who donated their body to science. And I made an incision from all the way from the back of the neck to the lower back. And I opened up the body to start seeing the muscles in the back. So that's called the dissection, when you as a medical student do the dissections. And then you have your professors and TAs walking around to help you. It's not just you're doing it by yourself. A prosection, on the other hand, is when everything is done for you. So that means that your school has a team of professional anatomists, and they will actually dissect everything for you. And then all you do is you come into the lab and you study the structures that they've dissected. So for example, say your anatomist dissected the arms. So then you would be tasked with identifying, okay, where's the bicep, where's the tricep, where's the musculocutaneous nerve, and all that stuff. Whereas a dissection, you have to dissect the arm and the bicep, and you have to figure all that out for yourself. There's pros and cons to both methods. I personally learn best by doing something myself with my own hands. I don't learn that well if I have someone else do it for me. So therefore, the difference between dissection and prosection was a really big influence on me. For medical school, honestly, everyone is going to be working hard. Imagine medical school being like the top 10% of people from your class, and now it's 160 people who are all the top percent in their classes from different schools. And it's kind of weird because, if you're the top 10% of your class right now, and then and if your whole medical school class is all the top 10% of people from their classes, now not everyone can be in the top 10%. There have to be some people who were the top 10% in undergrad who are now going to be average. So the whole point that I'm trying to make is everyone is going to be working super hard. So what helps you succeed in medical school is how smart you work. And once again, this just means time management. How effective can you study? On average, my school recommends 6 to 8 hours of studying every day. So I think that's kind of an exaggeration. I do 5 to 7 hours a day. Um, and these are actual full focus study hours. You can spend 6 hours in a library but only get like 4 or 3 hours worth of studying done. When I say 5 to 7 hours of studying, I mean like full focus. My phone is off. I'm in full focus mode. So 5 to 7 hardcore hours of studying. It's different when you get into exam weeks. So exam weeks in medical school, they're pretty much studying. I think I was talking to my classmates, and it turns out it's probably an average of 8 to 10 hours of studying per day. Um, I like to do 10 to 12, but the 8 to 10 is just based on what my classmates have told me, and I just kind of took an average from my sample size there. So 8 to 10 is about what it is for exam weeks. Um, I want to talk about things that may seem like common sense, but are not common sense. Number one is mental health. So what no medical school is going to disclose to you, and that's something that I wish that I asked, was the anxiety and depression and stress of medical school students. Statistically, if you look it up, it's like insanely high. Physicians are actually one of the most depressed people in like career wise, which is ironic because you think about the amount of money that doctors make, but just once again shows you that money does not correlate to happiness. And it's because they have such a huge burden of responsibility. They work long hours, and so I would definitely look into mental health facilities that your medical school offers. There's been a new trend nowadays ever since mental health has become more popular to talk about, that a lot of more medical schools are having more mental health facilities to help students. So I would definitely take into account what sort of student services the medical school offers in whichever one you're interested at. Having hobbies and friends is important because if you study 8 to 10 hours a day, you're going to get burned out, I would estimate, within 3 weeks of medical school, 3 or 4 weeks. That's not something that you can do continuously for 4 years. 8 to 10 hours a day for 4 years is not like, we're not robots. So you need to have an outlet. I mean, this can be something as simple from watching Netflix. If that's something that like you like to do, then watch Netflix. My personal thing is I like to exercise. So I have a reward system in place for me. If I study my 5 to 7 hours a day and I get my tasks done, I reward myself by going to the gym. And that's like my fun activity for the day. Okay, and having friends is important for two reasons. Something that I never did in undergrad is I never had study groups. I kind of just studied by myself. I didn't really study with other people because I never had productive study sessions. So this all changed in medical school. Um, my exam scores increased, I think it was 6% once I formed a study group. And the reason why is because the way that I did my study groups, we just did practice questions with each other. We didn't like review content, go through lectures. We did it on our own. We would just come together and we would just do test questions. And that's super helpful because you learn how other people think, and that you learn like if you don't understand something, you have your study group members who immediately explain it. And this saves so much time I cannot emphasize, because before I had a study group, if I didn't understand the answer to a question, I would have to go back to the lecture, look at my notes, and I wasted like 30 minutes trying to look up an answer to a question. Whereas in a study group, if I don't understand something, I just ask my members and I have my question answered within 10 to 15 seconds. So it helps tremendously. So study groups are like key in medical school. Don't be afraid to ask professors for help. Another thing that you want to look into when you go into medical school is the availability for professors and how willing they are to help students. So I actually had a pretty rough first semester of medical school. I had a lot of trouble adjusting because I was still using my undergrad study tactics. Like you read a chapter, you write your notes down, and then you memorize what you wrote down. That tactic doesn't work in medical school. Actually, in medical school, it's highly encouraged to not take handwritten notes. So I had to change my study methods when I got into medical school. And so I asked my professors for help. I actually went into my professor's office hours once or twice every week, and they helped me immediately. And once I started doing that, I actually saw, I think it was a 10% increase in my exam scores. And so after changing my studying methods and talking with my professors, it really did help. Next is the volume of content. I can safely say that I probably learned more in one semester of medical school than I have in my entire undergrad. Um, to kind of give you an example, I'm assuming most of you all who are watching this have taken metabolism or biochemistry, which is like glycolysis, the Krebs cycle. It's usually like a freshman class, I believe, like a semester-long class. We learned all of that within 2 weeks. Everything from glycolysis, like the whole metabolism process. That's roughly 1 to 2 weeks, depending on which medical school you go to. So what you learn in one semester of undergrad is condensed in about 2 weeks in medical school for metabolism, to just give you an idea of the intensity and pace and the volume of content that you have to be prepared for in medical school, which is intimidating, but you learn to adjust to it, and you learn so much information that it's really amazing. So now I want to talk about research specifically in medical school itself. So I think research in medical school is actually more important than in undergrad because now it helps you with the residency program. So this is when you match into a specialty. And I want to talk a little bit about my research that I'm doing. I'm going to take a water break. Hold on. Okay. So the research that I'm doing is I'm developing a virtual hospital for kids with bronchiolitis. So what that means is that obviously you guys have seen that with the coronavirus pandemic, that telemedicine is like the new big thing. And also be prepared to talk about it. Be prepared to talk about that in your interviews. A common question you'll most likely get asked is, how do you anticipate the future of telemedicine in healthcare? That was a side topic though, but essentially for my research project, what we're doing is that as soon as people are able to be discharged from the hospital, like kids are able to be discharged from the hospital, we take them, let them go back home, and then we follow up with them through telemedicine. The advantage to that is now we're making room for kids who need to be hospitalized. So anyone who can leave the hospital, we're letting them go home if they're safe enough, and we're making room for people who actually need to be hospitalized. This is a win-win situation because it's making the hospital a lot of money, and because we're treating the people who most need help. We're not denying them healthcare due to the lack of beds. And in medical school, the scale of projects is immensely more than you can imagine in undergrad. The project that I'm doing is actually a multi-million-dollar project. I'm working with a team of 2 mentors and 4 other medical school students. It's like a group project, 2 mentors. And I'll actually be pitching, we're actually going to be talking to the CEO of the hospital in a few months. So really exciting stuff. And it's really exciting if you want to do research in medical school, because like the scale of your projects is much bigger and the impact you can have is much bigger, because as a medical school student, you now have you naturally just elevate a level in terms of influence and people just take you more seriously. Now, the reason why research is so important and why I said publications are so important is because if you want to go into a competitive specialty. So if you are interested in going into cardiology, surgery, anesthesia, dermatology, ENT, neurosurgery, any one of those specialties, you need more than just a step 1 score to get in. They're going to want to see your research. They're going to want to see extracurricular activities to get in. So some people, after medical school, they literally do a year of research and then apply to residencies. Some people do research within medical schools and then apply to residencies. So just keep this in the back of your mind of how important research is if you are looking for those very competitive specialties. And then most people do research in residency and even fellowship. It's extremely hard because you're doing half your time spent in the hospital, and then you have to study outside the hospital for your board exams, and then you have to make time for research, and then most of y'all would probably have families by then, so you have to account for families. So I don't know how people do it, but people do it. But I think it's better to do research in medical school and as an undergrad in your position right now, so you can boost your application for when it comes to residency programs. So make sure that you're thinking like 5 or 6 steps ahead when it comes to research. Okay, so a little bit of shameless school promotion here. I want to talk about my school that I go to and why you need to apply to it. So I talked about our student section or our student health section. We have a whole section of our school dedicated to stress and anxiety, studying help, and the biggest thing is free tutors. So if you are struggling in a class, the school will literally appoint you a free tutor who will help you study. And once again, you don't need to pay out of pocket for this. This is included in your tuition. A cool thing is that you get clinical, you actually get in like actual patient experience your second year. So how medical school works is your first 2 years are in the books, you're just doing classes. Your third and fourth year are rotations, where you're doing in the hospital stuff. So my school actually offers clinics your second year to where you can actually start working in student-run health clinics, working with actual patients and getting that interaction with them. So you get a whole, so in fact you get 3 years of clinical experience if you choose to be involved in these programs. I want to talk about distinction tracks. So this is different from an MD PhD, an MD MBA, and MD in public health. Some schools will offer what is known as a distinction track. So for example, say that you're really passionate about lab research, like enzymes and like all that organic chemistry stuff and like lab data and quantification, a lot of stuff that undergrads typically do, but you don't want to get a PhD. So a lot of schools will offer distinction tracks. So for example, um, I don't want to get an MBA right now. I'm looking into residency programs that have an MBA built within them so that I don't have to do an extra year and pay extra money when I can just get the MBA paid for by my residency program. So instead of getting an MBA, what I'm doing is I got accepted into the Louisville Medical Business Distinction Tract. So once again, it doesn't grant you an MBA, but essentially I would graduate with an MD with a distinction in business. That's like what my application would say. And how these distinction tracks work is you work with a mentor, you develop a project over 3 or 4 years, and then you present at a national conference. So that's how it works in Louisville, at least. So by your fourth year, you present so I'll probably be presenting at the National Conference for Pediatric Research, where doctors from all of America get together for a national conference, and I'll give a presentation there in my fourth year based on this project that I'm doing. Now, with the University of Louisville, there was a conference that was held in Stanford where all the students from all the distinction tracks, got together and gave their presentations. Louisville beat Stanford, UPenn, and Cornell based on the distinction track program. So, we beat the Ivy League medical schools, which, hopefully shows you that, we have a really credible distinction track at the Louisville School of Medicine. Also, just the medical school is sandwiched between all these hospitals. So there are 4 hospitals all within walking distance. So I can promise you that any specialty that you're remotely interested in is within a 1-mile radius of the medical school. We have a specific hospital for trauma and ER, which is where I shadowed. We have a specific hospital just for pediatrics. We have a specific hospital just for lungs and heart. So no matter what, specialty you want to go to, I can guarantee you that it's all within a walking distance. Another really big thing is diversity. So one of the greatest accomplishments that I would say in medical school history has been that I think it was last year's statistics were released of roughly 50% of the classes in medical school are women now. This is important because medical schools were primarily male dominated throughout history. But now we've seen an upward trend of women getting involved into medicine. And within Louisville, we're proud to say that we have, I think it's roughly 48 or 49% females in our class. So that diversity is something that's really important. And we're the first medical school in the country to adopt a curriculum that takes into account LGBT plus care. So we have a separate class called standardized patients, where we actually get a fake patient, which is really cool. And you get to diagnose them and you get to do all these physical exams. And through that class, we are actually taught how to interact with LGBT plus patients and how to use effective communication to make sure that they are comfortable with what's happening. To give you some statistics for my school, the average MCAT for accepted applicants is a 508. And once again, I'm emphasizing this is the average, so there are people below it. There's a bunch of people with 502s, 503s, 504s in my class. The average GPA, this is average overall GPA, not BCPM, which is science. The average overall GPA is a 3.7. The last thing that I want to emphasize, I have it in all bolds and caps, or all bold and all the exclamation points, that we have a holistic view of the applicant. This is important because I talk with the admissions people at my school. No medical school will admit this to you, but there are some medical schools out there in the country that have a software that will filter you by MCAT and GPA. And if you don't meet a certain threshold, your application is not even looked at. You're taken to the trash. So they will only look at a certain portion of the MCAT and GPA. Our school is important because we have a holistic view of the applicant. So just because you have below than average MCAT and GPA does not mean that we throw your application into the trash. We'll actually take a look into account your overall application, your personal statement, your work and activities, letters of recommendation. That's how we make a judgment. So we take everything into context and relative, unlike some other schools. So I think this would greatly increase any of our chances of getting accepted because it has an overall holistic view of the applicant. So this last slide, if you all have any questions, my Instagram for the specific page that I post pre-medical stuff is called Medic Tribe. If y'all want to follow me on my personal one, it's Slim Fazy. What I want to emphasize is, if anything, I would recommend joining this group. It's just facebook.com/group/medic tribe, or you can just go into the Facebook search bar and search Medic Tribe and the group should pop up. I pretty much post daily tips for pre-meds in this group. And I think I have about 430 pre-meds from all over the nation in this group. So you can network with other people and other pre-meds and bounce ideas off of them. I have a website where I also post tips. That's faizanahmedmd.com. Here's my email, and then here's my number. So all these different ways to contact me. And if y'all have any questions, I'm more than welcome to answer them. But yeah, that's it. So if y'all have any questions, feel free to ask.
Faizan, thank you so much for such an in-depth presentation. I love that you hit on things that you should do if you're an underclassman, as well as things that you should do if you're more of an upperclassman and you're really like seriously considering medical school. Just one quick question that I had was that like, how does research work in medical school? Is it more like basic bench science, or is it more like clinical research?
So the cool thing with that is you get to decide what you want to do. I feel like an undergrad, just because you're an undergrad, it's limited to bench research. But with medical school, like I said, you're taken a little more seriously and you have more influence. So I have people that are doing clinical research right now, like a lot of friends are doing clinical research. Then I also have a lot of friends who are passionate about bench research. They really like that laboratory stuff. So you get to do both. It just depends on the faculty that you connect with. And once again, I want to emphasize with Louisville, the medical school is sandwiched between a cardiovascular research center and a spinal cord injury research center, which is a RI research center. The medical school is literally in between them. So you can email faculty from both places and get an idea what projects they do, and figure out if you can fit in there. If that answered your question.
Yeah, that did. Thank you.
Gotcha. Anyone else?
Hey Faizan, just a quick question. So, what would you recommend to do for like preparing for interviews for med schools?
Yeah, so for interviews, honestly, what I did was I just Googled like common medical school interview questions. You can do a quick Google search, and my undergrad institution, so the University of Louisville, they actually set up practice interviews for students who are interested in going into medical school. I don't know if that's a thing that's also offered at your school, but I will look into it. So that's what I did. I set up a few practice interviews with people at my school, and I just got constructive feedback off of them. So I would just kind of go through the questions and just have a basic answer. And something that I want to emphasize, I made this mistake in one of my interviews. Don't get to the point where you have a rehearsed and memorized answer. So, for example, this is kind of like, I don't want to use the word deceptive, but like one question that you're gonna get asked is, tell me about yourself. Like, I can guarantee you're gonna get asked in that some form or another. So don't like recite that answer like you're reading it from like a piece of paper and it's like a speech. Like, hi, my name is Faizan Ahmed and I'm this and this and this. Act like your interviews are a conversation. The best interviews are conversational. Like literally talk to your interviewer like they're like a friend. Like, because how you would tell, if I asked you to tell me about yourself, you would probably tell me like a really conversational, like relaxed way, like who you are and what you do. But don't like get all formal and strict when you're talking to an interviewer. Like, they don't really like that. So just treat it like a conversation. That's the biggest tip that I have to, that most people don't do well. That they'll get really nervous and have like a rehearsed and memorized script that they recite from. And that comes across as super awkward and unnatural.
I'm going to jump in here really quick. So for everyone from state or from Meredith or schools that don't really have a medical school on campus the way that Duke and Wake Forest and UNC do, I would say for us is exactly what Rebia is saying in the chat. Please reach out to Ray, Easterlin, or any pre-health advising person at state, or reach out to your professors at state because they all want to help you. And same goes for Meredith. I'm sure that you guys have a pre-med club or advisors who are more knowledgeable about what resources are best for you based on your campus. So I just want to jump in there. And also, Faizan, there's a couple of questions for you in the chat as well. Pavitra asked, did you apply to MD and DO schools or just MD?
So I applied to MD and DO schools. I applied to DO schools as kind of like a backup. Not that DO schools are a backup. Just want to clarify that. I'm not talking trash on DO schools, but I applied to the MD schools just because number one was proximity to my family. Living close within my where my family is a really big thing to me. So the DO school was 4 or 5 hours away, whereas the MD schools were 1 hour away. So proximity, the type of research is something that's important to me, as well as should be important to you. So the DO school that I applied to did not have a research program, but it was the DO school that's in Kentucky is actually a top 10 rated DO school in the nation. It's called Pikeville. So I would definitely look into Pikeville if you're interested in DO. Also, I know that I'm not interested in family practice and primary, like family practice and like that primary care stuff. So DO is not something that interested me a whole lot. But if you are interested in like that, you want to serve like the underrepresented, like rural populations is really big within DO schools. If that's something you're passionate about, then I would definitely go DO. If you're focusing on like rural and like the underrepresented populations and primary like family practice stuff. Like I said, I'm more interested in like anesthesia and like cardiology, and I just found better opportunities with that with the MD schools. Not that DO schools don't have those opportunities, but like there's just DO schools are better for primary care and family practice.
Do you have any advice for going about writing your personal statement?
Yeah. How can I see the questions that I'm getting asked? Is there a way?
If you press chat.
Yeah, I pressed chat right here. Can you still see my screen? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm in chat right now.
I think the next question from Nia was, what type of things should pre-meds do during the pandemic, like virtual volunteering?
Yeah, so with virtual volunteering, let me try to think about that. So the hospital here at Louisville, they've created a new program where they allow pre-meds to virtually shadow. I don't know if that's a thing in North Carolina. Like, I don't know if that's something that doctors in North Carolina are doing, but essentially the doctors will wear like glasses that project what they're doing, which is really cool and insane. And you can shadow that way. I don't know if that's a thing that's happening in North Carolina, but a lot of medical school students and undergrad students are shadowing that way, and it's actually counting as shadowing hours. In terms of volunteering, so Off the top of my head, I don't know any virtual volunteering opportunities right now. I can get back to you on that. I can try to Google some, but I know that there are some in terms of shadowing, but I don't know off of the top of my head on things that you can do.
Faizan, I'm going to jump in here again. And since we're talking about virtual opportunities, this doesn't really count as volunteering, but with the STEM Journal Club, our entire purpose about why we were founded was to help students during COVID-19 who are impacted by a loss of like internships and research opportunities. So if you guys are really looking for something to do during COVID-19 to kind of supplement other opportunities that you would have had if this pandemic had not occurred, I would really highly recommend joining our club. We're open to everyone. We just want to help people get into research, talk about research, how to write in research, and just how to have a conversation with other people about research as well. So that's going to be my self promo there, and I'll turn it back to you.
Awesome. One thing that I wanted to add on to what you were saying is because you have like a research club, the one thing, this is going to help you out in medical school. I should have put this in my presentation. The one class that I think should be mandatory as a pre-med, I don't know if this is a prereq in North Carolina. It is in Kentucky. It's statistics. Statistics is like the backbone of research because you actually take a class called biostats in medical school, and it's a semester's worth long of statistics in undergrad condensed into 2 weeks. So it's extremely fast paced. I don't think it does it justice because statistics is pretty complicated. But as a doctor, a legit scenario is that you will be approached by pharmaceutical companies to to advertise their drug. So for example, I talked to a cardiologist. He was approached by a pharmaceutical company for a new blood thinner that was guaranteed to help patients. And the pharmaceutical company that approached him gave him a bunch of research and publications and all this fancy stuff that proved like an 85% success rate in decreasing helping with blood pressure. So when he looked into the research and actually conducted a statistical analysis, it turned out that the sample size of the patients that the company that was looking at, they were actually patients who were already recovering. Like they were healthy, recovering patients. So obviously, no matter what drug you give them, their hearts are going to recover and their vitals are going to turn back to normal. So you can't say that the drug directly caused that effect. So the statistics were actually debunked, and he rejected the company. So one thing that you all can do during this pandemic is I would just take a look at there's so many online courses like Harvard Online, Coursera, Udemy, like all these online platforms. I would take a clinical research course, and you can put that on your pre-med application. I think that would really make you all stand out. If you need something to do in your free time, take a clinical statistics course and then read research papers and focus on doing a statistical analysis. Because that's actually exactly what you do in medical school and as a doctor, like verbatim. That's what we do. We have to read articles and do statistical analysis. So just doing that as a pre-med will set you like 10 steps ahead when you're in medical school.
And I'm just going to do another little self-promo. And if you do end up wanting to do the, analysis of the statistical data, you guys could always present it here. I know you talked a lot about publication and how that's really important at our club. I don't know if I think a lot of people here are new and not our usual people who come, but our club got published under Office of Undergraduate Research website under their publications tab. So obviously it's not the same as being in a medical journal or anything like that, but if you're talking to professors in the future, you can show them the blog and show them that it's under Office of Undergraduate Research and you've published something somewhere at least get your foot in the door for with professors who want you to do a lot of reading articles. Even with this club, I didn't have any research going in, but I talked to our advisor, Dr. Galler, and the one thing he really looks for is a student who's willing to read a bunch of research articles and analyze them. That's how he wants people to start. So I think just saying you have a bit of experience doing that could really help you find research at at whatever local school you go to.
Awesome.
Also, Faizan, the next question in the chat was from Jennifer Potts, and she was asking, were you saying to take the MCAT the summer before junior year or after?
So yeah, it should be after your junior year is finished, that's summer. So after junior year. And that's assuming that you want to go into medical school without any gap years. So just straight in. So
And
after
also,
junior year.
sorry, I also said this in the chat as well, but I don't know if you guys saw it. But honestly, the MCAT, studying for it, it's really a full-time job. If you want to take it without a gap year, I really recommend making sure that your schedule allows you to have that, like, enough time to study for it, because it's not something that you can take lightly. It's not just an exam that you can say, oh, I have to take this, I'll briefly review. Like, it's really something that you have to really put in the work to study for. So I recommend making sure that your schedule allows you that time to study for it. And it really just boils down to you, what your schedule is looking like, and just what's going on in your life at that time. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Awesome. Can I talk a little bit about the MCAT, just my personal tips on it?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so I don't know how many like juniors or there are or people who are studying for the MCAT, but specifically for the MCAT, a lot of people ask me about like, hey, what's the best resource and this and that. The number one best resource, like universally, is the AAMC question packs. So for all of you who don't know, AAMC are the people who write the MCAT, and they have actually released question packs. I don't know how many questions there are, maybe like 150 questions per section, and they have four full-length practice exams. Those are the most accurate questions you will get that model the actual MCAT. Now, there are a bunch of third-party companies like Kaplan, Next Step, UWorld is a big one that's popular. I recommend UWorld, by the way, and Exam Crackers. Like, there's all these like third-party companies, and I wouldn't fall into what I call analysis paralysis by like spending like a ton of hours researching which is the best company. And like all of them have their pros and cons, and I promise you whichever one that you use is going to help you. I would save the AMC questions and their practice exams for like the last month that you study for the MCAT. Don't burn because those are the most useful, save those for the very end. I would use your third-party companies before then, and then yeah, the MCAT is a full-time job. I didn't a mistake that I made. I didn't really touch upon this was I did not give myself, I didn't give myself enough time to study for the MCAT. I only gave myself 45 days to study for the MCAT. I recommend 3 months, honestly. Some people can do it in less time, like if they have a stronger background in science. I needed more study time. And so it really is a full-time job. So once you're in MCAT study mode, I treat it like a full-time job. So what I mean by that is a 9 to 5 job every day, and treat it like an actual job. So you're not on your phone. You're not like going to the bathroom every 10 minutes. You're not like, taking random walks. Treat it like an actual job where you're sitting in a room and you're focused and studying for 9 to 5. It's not something to take lightly. And unfortunately, once again, I don't agree with how this is done. But the less times you take the MCAT, the better with medical schools. It's okay if you take it I took it twice actually, and I showed an improvement, which is good. But you wouldn't. It's not like the ACT where you can take it like 10 times or 8 times and try to get the score that you want. You really want to take it like the fewer amount of times as possible. And the reason why this is important, because I'm jumping a little too far ahead, but the step 1, which is the medical school board exam, you are actually only allowed to take that exam once, like ever in your life. The score that you get on that exam is the score that you get. You're not allowed to retake it. So I think that's why they're kind of modeling the MCAT after step 1. Like you want to just take it the least amount of times as possible. But yeah, that was just my 2 cents on it.
And the last thing I want to add with the MCAT is that it's very money heavy. Like it's very expensive, first of all, to even sign up for it. And also you don't want to be in the position where you sign up for a date, you realize you're not ready, and then you have to reschedule, because it's actually $95 to reschedule, and you might not even get refunded for rescheduling. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. Make sure that you're thinking ahead about what your life is going to look like and what you have going on that semester. So with that being said, our next question is from Abby. And she said, what type of tips/advice did the professors give you in terms of studying in medical school?
Yeah, good question. So once again, the biggest problem that I struggled with was that I was conditioned in undergrad, and I think everyone does, is that we read a chapter, we summarize, we take bullet point notes in our own words, and then we memorize those bullet point notes, and then we take the exam and regurgitate what we just memorized. That was pretty much the general thing. Like in organic chemistry, you take notes, write the reactions, memorize them, and then that's it. Same thing for biology, microbiology. I think that's what a lot of people do. With medical school, so I did the whole note-taking thing. Believe it or not, in 2 weeks, I had my first exam in medical school after, I think, 2 or 3 weeks of being in school. I took bullet point notes over each of the, like we have lectures, like PowerPoint presentations. I had about 25 pages of handwritten notes from my 2 or 3 weeks. Like I said, the volume is so much, and like realistically, you can't memorize 25 pages of notes in like for a test. That's just not doable. So what I did was I would make summary sheets. So for each lecture, I would summarize the entire information for the lecture into half a page or 1 page. I would only write down the need to know information. So I only wrote down chemical pathways. So like, for example, the sodium potassium pump. That was a pathway that you have to relearn in medical school. And so I wrote down that pathway. I like to write down pathways so that I can study them. And like, if something goes wrong in this end, what happens at the beginning? Like those are really common questions, like feedback inhibition, competitive inhibition, all the biochemistry stuff. So the only stuff that I really write down now on paper, if you look at my notes, are just pathways from different like drugs that you take, different like mechanisms in the body. I stopped taking handwritten notes, and what I do now is I advise everyone to Google on their own active versus passive learning. So scientific studies have actually proven that handwritten notes are one of the worst ways to learn material. They're really good for short-term memory. So if you're trying to cram for a test that you're taking the next day, yeah, handwritten notes work. If we're trying to retain information for long term, handwritten notes are scientifically proven to be the worst way. And once again, you can fact check me. It's called active versus passive learning. The best rated way to learn, by best proven in science, is practice questions. So wherever you can find practice questions, do those. Majority of your learning will come from practice questions. And the second way is flashcards. So you guys might be familiar with Anki. Anki is what like 99% of medical students use. Most people, I use Quizlet for studying for the MCAT, but I think even now, undergrads use Anki. I'm not sure what the trend is nowadays, but in medical school, we use Anki. And the second years, they pass down their Anki decks for me. So for each lecture that we have, there's a pre-made Anki deck. So I just, after I study a lecture, I'll go through the Anki deck and I'll just quiz myself on what I don't know off the flashcards. And so that's called active recall, and that's what really helps. So just to summarize my answer, that was really long. Flashcards and pathways are the only things that I write down, and practice questions, those three things. So that was the advice that my professors gave. And number 4 was forming a study group. So those were the 4 things that I did. And just by doing that, I started actually scoring above average in medical school, which was like a really big accomplishment for me. Prior to that, I was below average.
Faizan, our next question is from Huma, and she asked, would biostats be helpful if we took it in undergrad?
Yeah, biostats is extremely helpful no matter when you take it. I took just probability and statistics. My undergrad school does not offer biostats. So the fact that you even have a biostats class is awesome. I would like 100% recommend taking it. But even more important, I would actually recommend applying it to actual research articles. So don't take the class just to pass the test and get an A. Treat it as one of those classes you will use for the rest of your life. The information in biostats is directly applicable to when you're a doctor. Like z-scores, p-values, t-tests, that's all stuff that I have to use every day as a medical school student.
Faizan, Pooja also asked, I've heard a lot about Anki. Do you recommend using that? If so, is it a good study supplement in undergrad?
Yeah, so Anki is, you don't have to wait till you're studying for the MCAT. Actually, for the MCAT, you can Google, there are actually MCAT decks or Anki decks for the MCAT that go through each of the Kaplan books. And that way you don't even have to take any handwritten notes for the MCAT. You can literally study a chapter, write down what you think you might need to write down, and go through the Anki decks. I took handwritten notes for the MCAT. Like I said, really bad strategy. I had way too many. So I would get in the habit of using Anki even as a pre-med, like as a freshman. So all you do is say you're going through your classes, you see a little fact. Let me think of something. Like meiosis produces four cells. Okay, that's like a basic biology fact. I would make that an Anki card. How many cells are produced from meiosis versus how many cells are produced from mitosis? That would be an Anki card for me. And you can make that and just keep making Anki cards over your chapters, and then do Anki cards every day. And so that way, literally in bed before you go to bed, that this is what I do. Like right before I go to bed, I'll just go through my Anki cards and I'll go to sleep, and it works really well.
And then Sarah asked, what kind of experience do you need to shadow a doctor? And I guess going off this question, could you kind of just give us some insight into how to reach out to a doctor to shadow them?
Yeah. So in terms of, you don't need any experience to shadow a doctor. Note, I don't think any doctor can deny you shadowing just because you don't have like research experience. No, all you need. So what I would do is, what I did was I would send an email, and my email template was, "Hi, my name is Faizan Ahmed. So introduce yourself, your name, say what your major is. I'm in biomedical engineering," and then say I'm interested in learning more about cardiology. I came across your contact and would love to know if I can come shadow you, even if just for a few hours. Please let me know if you have any availability in the end. So keep it very short and simple. And I use that, I use the same script for every email that I wrote. So introduction, what your major is, and then tell them that you're interested in learning more about their career, and then ask when they're available. And unfortunately, because doctors are so busy, you're only going to get a response, I would say 25% of the time. So for every 4 doctors that I emailed, only 1 would actually respond back to me. And so just get used to sending a lot of emails and be okay with rejection. Another thing that you can do is that if you're really passionate about shadowing a certain doctor, you can call the department that they work for. So for example, for a hot second in undergrad, I was really into trauma surgery. You know, like when people come in with like gunshot wounds or like they're about to die, then I wanted to see what the surgeons do. They're called trauma surgeons. And I couldn't get a hold of the trauma surgeons. So what I did was I called the Department of Trauma Surgery. I spoke to the secretary. I'm like, "Hey, I'm a medical student. I just want to shadow. What can I do to shadow one of the physicians?" And then she set it up for me. So if you have no luck in email, call the department that you're interested in and then talk to the secretary, and then they should be able to help you. So email or phone works.
Our next question is from Cassie, and she asked, do you have any advice when it comes to writing your personal statement?
Yeah, so I used what's called, whenever I tutor students, the way that I tutor my students right now, I have 5 or 6. I use what's called a superhero formula. So what the superhero formula is if you've seen any superhero movie, you have a guy who at the beginning faces a lot of challenges. Then he finds a superpower and he starts helping other people. That's like the generic formula for every superhero movie. So the formula that I use for my personal statement, and then I can actually share my personal statement with you all. I don't know who to forward it to, but I can share it with you, Myra. I can send it. But what I did was I basically introduced, I started with actually the day that I was born, and I kind of had a sequence, like a kind of a story. Challenges that I went through when I was in elementary school, challenges that I went through when I was in middle school, high school, and how I overcame each one of those challenges, and how those challenges led to me to discovering medicine, and not how I want to use medicine to help people. So it kind of goes off the superhero formula. You introduce a challenge, you talk about how you overcame it and what lessons you learned and how that relates to medicine. So I literally just repeated that formula with 2 or 3 specific examples in my personal statement, and it worked out pretty well for me.
So then we have 2 questions from Sarah, and she said about the stuff that you said about studying in medical school. So when you said you study 5 to 7 hours a day, she's asking if that includes with your classes or without your classes, and kind of like what the structure of a typical week looks for you as a medical school student. And then her second question was, when you say study for the MCAT, do you mean solving practice tests or studying the content?
Yeah, both are pretty good questions. So in medical school, this is going to seem really foreign to you all, but only 10 people out of the 160 actually go to class. The rest of us study at home or on our own. So what I mean by that is that in medical school, that everything, like the lectures are recorded. So as a professor, so say there's an 8 to 9 a.m. lecture, right? So I'm an early bird, so I like to get up at 4 or 5 and go to the gym. And I'll do my Anki cards from the day before, and I'll wait for that lecture to be recorded from 8 to 9. As soon as it hits 9, I jump on the lecture and I'll watch it at 1.5 speed to save myself time. Because usually professors, you can get through by 1.5 or 2x speed. So I'll watch a 50-minute lecture in 25 minutes. And as I'm watching the lecture, I'll take my own notes, maybe make my own Anki cards. And so, yeah, that whole process of watching a lecture, making my Anki cards, and then studying them is what I mean by 5 to 7 hours. And then on the weekend, because I have no lectures, obviously, there aren't any lectures being given. Saturday, Sunday, the 7 hours that I do on those days is me going back through the week and reviewing all the content that I've learned in the week and trying to memorize and do the Anki cards for those lectures so that I don't forget what I learned on the first week for first day. And so hopefully that answers your question about medical school, that the lectures are online. You're only really required to come to campus for labs and tests and quizzes. Other than that, most medical schools don't require you to come to campus. So actually, I just study at home, or I like to go to like a coffee shop and study at my own pace. So you make your own schedule in medical school, which is super nice because everything is recorded. I would double check though. Some medical schools, I think some DO schools specifically, require attendance. So the school in Pikeville requires you to come to class every day from 8 to 3. And then you study at home after that. That's why going to a medical school, which there were online classes, was a really big factor for me, because I'm the type of person where I like to study at my own pace and make my own schedule. That's just how I function. In terms of the MCAT, so usually there's 2 phases of the MCAT. There's content review and then there's practice questions. That's like how most people do it. What I do is that starting from day 1, the very first day that you open your MCAT books, do CARS passages every day. CARS is the reading section of the MCAT. So that's just reading comprehension. You don't have to memorize formulas or anything. It's just how well you can understand a passage. So every day you can start doing practice questions from day 1, do CARS passages. So in like a standard 2 or 3 month cycle that most pre-meds do for the MCAT, roughly the first month is just content review. It's going through those books, and those 5 to 7 and those like 9 to 5 that you're doing is going through all the books, making the Anki cards and making sure that you understand all like the little facts. Like, do you understand stoichiometry? Do you understand like mitosis, meiosis, competitive? You're just trying to get the content down. The majority of your improvements is going to come after content reviews, when you start doing practice questions. So this is when you start doing practice exams and you start doing QPACs. Then your 5 to 7 hours is going to be literally just questions. So you'll do questions, you'll figure out what you get wrong, and you'll find your weaknesses, and then you'll review on what you got wrong. So I think of it like a circle. I would do practice questions, and I would do maybe 100 practice questions. I would make an Excel sheet on things that I missed, and say I missed 2 or 3 questions on mitosis. That means that mitosis is a weakness. So I would go back to my Kaplan books, and then I would study mitosis to make sure that I'm freshening up on that concept, to make sure that I'm turning my weaknesses into my strengths. So during the content revision phase, the most of your time is spent doing practice questions. During the content review phase, majority of your time is spent doing this content review. So it just depends on like where you are in your MCAT study cycle. Everyone just does it differently. Everyone has their own way of doing it. That's just the way that I did it.
Faizan, thank you so much for coming to talk to us. And I just want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know we're a little over right now, but please take a screenshot of the slide that Faizan has up right now. And if you have any more questions, you guys can reach out to him on there. And if you guys are looking for the presentation, we've recorded it and we'll upload it onto our YouTube channel shortly. And we'll also post summaries of everything that Faizan said on our blog as well. So please continue to check out SJC if you guys want to join. We have our weekly meetings every Tuesday at 1 p.m. And again, I really encourage you guys, if you guys have any questions, please check out Faizan's Club Medic Tribe on Facebook and Instagram. They have super informative questions, and a lot of it is stuff that you guys are asking as well. So if you go on there, you guys can see how other pre-meds kind of answered these questions and what works for other people as well. Thank you, Faizan. Thank you so much for coming.
No problem. Thank you so much. All right. Take care.
Okay, I think that was fine. I think that went well.